My name's Kate McDonald. I'm an associate professor in the history department. Yeah, what is it that we do? So I would say that historians, we take documents and we use them to tell stories about the past. And sometimes what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what happened. Sometimes what we're doing is trying to figure out why did that thing happen. Other times we're trying to recover a story that's been forgotten about. Sometimes it's been erased on purpose. So there's lots of different reasons that we pick up these documents and start trying to put them together to tell stories, but ultimately we're using evidence to tell stories about the past. So what you would do as a history major is you would learn the skills of interpreting documents, which when I say it like that, it sounds a little bit like magic. But what you're doing is you're becoming able to pick up something from the past. And this could be a piece of paper, a policy document, it could be a photograph, a piece of clothing, and situate it in its context, right? Look for particular clues that may not be obvious to people who haven't studied that particular era, and then link up that document or that piece of evidence with other documents and other knowledge that we have about the past to tell your own new story about the past. So we have a lot of faculty in the department who use undergraduates to help them with their research. There's one of our faculty members is doing a lot of digital history on ancient China and has undergraduate researchers help him create these basically video game worlds that that the users then explore. We've got other faculty who are working on digitizing and recreating archives of colonial documents in Latin America that are falling apart, need to be scanned, and then need to be read, right? And I don't know about your handwriting. My handwriting is terrible. And so this is where the historians have to go back and they have to learn how to read the handwriting from people in that era so they can then make sense of the text and preserve it with its metadata. So there's lots of opportunities in the department to get, to get your hands dirty or your feet dirty, to get involved in working with documents. So the cool research thing that I've done is actually working with students in my History 9 class, which is about the bombing of Hiroshima. And I helped them put together an exhibit on the history of August 6, 1945. So this is the day that the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And what they learn in the class is that there's basically an infinite number of ways that you can tell the story of what happened, depending on whose perspective you're using, depending on how early you want to start the story and how late you want to start the story, different details that you want to bring up, highlight these kinds of things. So I work with the students in that class to collect documents and to interpret those documents, and then ultimately to communicate that analysis to an audience of not just me, but also their peers. And that's really fun. Well, why not? I wanted to be a stand-up comedian, but that seems like it's hard to actually get paid. So here I get to have a captive audience, something like 150 days a year, and they have to laugh at my jokes. A couple different people that come to mind. So one person would be, or just a group of people are these students who take this History 9 class who find out, and this is often in their first year here, they find out that what they're supposed to be doing at the university is not just consuming knowledge, not just sitting there and sort of absorbing the things that we have to tell them and the books have to tell them, but they're here to be creating knowledge. And I think for a lot of people, this is a really powerful transformation in their understanding of who they are in the world. And that to me is always really incredible to see happen. And then the second person I can think of is, this is related, there was a woman in one of my lower division courses once, and I always ask at the end of the year, what's the most important thing you learned? And she said, I learned that I got to have ideas too. And that's always stuck with me, because the thing about history is that there's stories that are not true, right? The stories that we tell need to be true, but within the category of true stories, there's really an infinite number of stories you can tell. And so everybody's got something that they're going to bring to the table that comes from their own experience and comes from the particular things that they've read, which is going to lead them to put documents together in their own unique way, right? So it really can be a transformative discipline for so many people. Reading. It can be a lot of reading. And I think it's overwhelming for students because you don't know what you're reading for, right? So faculty, and I do this, really try to give you questions that are going to help guide your reading, right? But ultimately, I think I can see how it's a little stressful on the students' end, right? To kind of try to absorb all of this information and to worry that you're missing something or you're not getting the right thing. So what to me is really helpful when you're faced with that, and I think you'll be faced with that in most of your classes, is to recognize that the first part of any course is really getting your head stuck in the washing machine. I mean, you're just going to need to be dropped into a whole new, I mean, in this case, a whole new era of human life where a lot of the things that we take for granted are not, we don't think about them in the same way that people in that moment would have thought about them. Lots of details that might have been obvious to people in that moment but aren't obvious to us now. And so you've got to read and just get that floating around in your brain somewhere, right? So rather than panicking about having to get everything right away, I actually ask my students to plan to read everything 2 or 3 times, but to not stress too much every time you read it, right? You're going to notice different things, write down what you notice, go back a day later, read it again, you'll notice something different, right? And that's how over time you develop this body of knowledge that you're comfortable with. And that's what you then use to interpret these documents and to read more things. And you find over time it gets so much easier. I wish that they would know that history is written by humans. It's something that is done by people, right? So one of the primary things that historians do is, we look at documents to find out who wrote them, when did they write them, right? What does the time period in which they wrote them tell us about the assumptions they might have made or the work they were trying to do with that document? We look to see, did this one person tell a story in the same way as this other person did? Probably not. So what's different about them, right? And why not? And the thing that's really important to take away from that is that things like textbooks are also written by people, right? So the textbooks portrays knowledge as something that just is, right? But actually it's written by 2, 3, 4, 5 faculty members, and they're trying to come up with a kind of comprehensive story about a particular era. But you also get to say, hey, something's missing here. Like, yeah, I'm getting a good sense of this thing, but I'm really not hearing a lot about this other thing that I think is probably pretty important, right? So I want you to feel empowered to raise your hand in class and ask that question, right? Don't think that you just aren't getting it. You're probably noticing something really important, right? And we need to hear from you. Congratulations. It's like you've come to Starfleet Academy and you get to walk around for 4 years and talk to people about ideas, and that's your job. I would take moments to revel in it and take advantage of it when you can. Do go to office hours. Really, people don't do this. Or they don't do it until it's week 9 and bad things are happening with their grades. So go early when and say like, I feel like I'm not understanding what I'm supposed to be doing here, right? This is a conversation I love to have with students. I also love to hear, how you ended up in this university, how you ended up in this class. What do you want to do? What interests you, right? This helps to build just a better classroom environment, right? So come see us, come talk to each other about what you're doing in class, because your friends are going to have interesting reactions too, and enjoy it. It's a great opportunity.